Hello and welcome to this BCS IT Leaders Forum, Inclusive Leadership, Are You Building the Right Culture? My name is John Edwards and I'm delighted to introduce our speakers this afternoon. Katie Gleghorn is a Portfolio Director and Diversity and Inclusion Consultant at Charlotte Sweeney Associates and will give the keynote presentation, A Leader's Guide to Diversity and Inclusion. Hannah Parsons, Matthew Metcalf and Becky O'Farrell are responsible together for talent acquisition and diversity, inclusion and engagement at Covéa Insurance and will share their experiences with us. And Stacey Foreman is an IT PMO manager at the University of Leeds. She's recently set up a Women in Tech staff network there and will explore the issues that network is addressing. We'll have a Q&A session after the presentation, so please do jot down your questions into the chat function in your GoToWebinar control panel, and we'll deal with as many as we have time for before we close at 5:15. So I'll hand over to our first speaker and welcome Katie Gleghorn.
Thank you very much, John. Nice to see everybody this afternoon and thank you for joining us. And firstly, thank you to BCS for inviting me to take part in this afternoon's session. So my name is Katie Gleghorn and as John introduced me, I am a diversity and inclusion specialist at Charlotte Sweeney Associates. Just very quickly, a little bit of background about me. My career was predominantly spent in financial services, almost 20 years. I spent some time as a business analyst, at which point I undertook a diploma with the BCS, so it's a nice connection to come back. I was a project manager before making the transition into the diversity and inclusion space, and I've been working with Charlotte for the last 18 months as her portfolio director, supporting a range of colleagues and organisations across the globe in a number of sectors and supporting with various aspects of their diversity and inclusion agenda. So for today's session, and before I hand over to the rest of the panelists and we go into the Q&A, I'm going to spend some time sharing with you some thoughts and insights with regards to diversity and inclusion, and specifically thinking about it from a leader's perspective. The first thing I'd like to share is with regards to the terminology. Diversity and inclusion is at the forefront of everybody's mind right now for a various range of topics, be that because of what's going on in the press, where you are as organisations. But it seems important to take a moment to just reflect on what we actually mean by diversity and inclusion. So the avoidance of doubt when we're talking today with regards to diversity, we're talking about the tapestry and the jigsaw that makes every individual themselves. So it is what makes you you. That's a range of different components as shown on screen with regards to the jigsaw. There'll be naturally a lot of overlap and you may have areas of similarity with regards to the people that you surround yourself at work or at home. There'll also be a various number of points of difference as well. And diversity really encapsulates all of that. If we're thinking about inclusion then, inclusion is how we bring all those various aspects of diversity together and how we create an environment where all of those components are valued, understood and respected. It's really important to say that there's a fine balance to strike between diversity and inclusion, and a lot of organisations are particularly diverse, but actually when it comes to inclusion, that might be where they're falling short. So it's really important in your roles as leaders that you give the focus and attention to both of these aspects. Just to share a little bit more about the terminology. Here's a visual that prompts a lot of really good discussion around some different terminology. So here what we're presenting is the difference between equality, equity, and then drawing that back to inclusion. As the image presents on screen, when we're talking about equality, what we're doing is looking to present everybody with exactly the same opportunity. In this visual, we're thinking about the opportunity to watch the football game at hand. And actually what we're doing with the spectators is we're giving them all the same opportunity. We're treating them equally. When we think about equity, that's slightly different. And as the visual shows, we're giving everybody the same opportunity to again watch the football match. But in this instance, equity allows us to be supportive of differences. And we appreciate that not everybody comes from the same starting position. And then the final image is with regards to inclusion. where we eliminate any barriers, bias or blind spots. And actually what we do is we look at the systemic changes needed to create that environment of inclusion and offer everybody the same opportunities. So that's a real whistle-stop tour of terminology for the purpose of today's conversation. What I'd like to share with everybody then is regards to why it's important. So why do we need to do diversity and inclusion? Why should organisations, why should we as leaders be thinking about turning our focus and our attention to this? First and foremost, everybody will say it's the right thing to do, and that's absolutely the case, but it goes much further than that as well. There's a whole wealth of information and research that exists if you want to have a look into any of it that will substantiate why we need to focus our attentions on diversity and inclusion. But here are some of the stats that really bring that to life. And this was through a Deloitte piece of research that was conducted in 2018. So some of the headline statistics share that through inclusive leaders, there is a 70% increase in feelings of fairness, respect and value in their teams. That translates to a 17% increase in team performance, a 20% increase in decision-making quality. And when we're talking about decision-making quality, we're actually making reference to the quality and not the speed. So in diverse environments, it might be that the decisions are reached slowly and slower pace, but actually the quality of those decisions proves to be better. There's also 29% view, apologies everyone, technology there. John, have we still got the slides on screen?
Yes, they're still there, it's fine.
Apologies, I can only see myself now, so apologies, thank you for that, for confirming. With regards to there being a 29% increase in team collaboration, apologies for the hiccup there, thank you for bearing with me. So we all know, and I'm sure we talk about on a daily basis, the link between collaboration and innovation, and that innovation is actually at the forefront of most organisations' strategic direction. So there's a direct link between diversity and inclusion and collaboration and innovation. There's also a difference and a shift with regards to what employees want and what employees expect from organisations. So actually 72%, the survey found that 72% of individuals surveyed would leave an organisation for one that was more inclusive. Within that then, 30% of millennials, so those born between the 80s and the 90s, 30% of them have already left an organisation in favour of a more inclusive one. I know I certainly fall within that bracket, and that's something that I considered when I made a shift with regards to my career about 18 months ago. And furthermore, 33% of individuals surveyed said that they did not feel comfortable being themselves, sharing their thoughts and sharing their ideas at work. And that's a point for reflection. So I'd ask each of you to consider, actually, are you one of those 33%? Are you one of the 1 in 3? And if you are, what environments create that feeling where actually you're not able to be yourself? Is it certain meetings, certain environments at work? And conversely, if you're not one of the 1 in 3, then actually who might that be in your team? Who might that be around you? And what's the impact? What's the impact of the team members around you and the colleagues that you work with when they're not able to be themselves at work? What does that do in terms of stifling their creativity and their ability to contribute? So if we think about deep diving into actually what's my role as a leader, so Deloitte went further than the research and developed 6 signature traits, which I think are a really good basis for us to start the conversation. So these are key behaviours that we would expect to see demonstrated consistently in inclusive leaders. If we think about starting in the top right-hand corner, curiosity, my particular favourite. So it's the ability as a leader to be curious, to be able to explore different ideas and see where that curiosity takes you, to be curious about individuals and others around you. So asking questions to get to know people's perspectives, people's backgrounds, people's preferences and what they can contribute to the wider picture. If we think about cultural intelligence and how critical this will be to being an inclusive leader. So how many of us as leaders can hand on heart say that we have cultural intelligence that goes beyond our normal frame of reference? And what impact does that have, both positively and negatively? So thinking about, are we aware about different religions, different beliefs, different cultural traditions and perspectives that could help shape our team, shape our ideas, our products, and how we engage with our end consumers? Thinking about collaboration then, we've already talked about the intrinsic link between collaboration and innovation, and how innovation will be at the forefront of the mind for most organisations, and it's absolutely critical to the continued success of organisations, particularly in the current climate. So how do we bring those teams together? The current environment with COVID adds an extra layer of complexity to that, because gone are the days where we have those meetings in the corridors, the meetings in the coffee room, the meetings over lunch. So how do we create those opportunities as leaders to bring people together? To bring people together in a way that allows them to get to know each other, that gets to understand their backgrounds and their perspectives, not just what they do in their role day to day. Thinking then about commitment. So as leaders, this can often be a tricky one, because when we're working in diverse and inclusive organisations, sometimes it gets tough. By the very nature of it being a diverse organisation, not everybody's going to see eye to eye all of the time. So how do we stay committed when the going gets tough? And in that respect, it's thinking about just keeping going, creating habits and keeping going with it, and staying committed to the agenda, because we know that when we make progress and we turn that dial in a positive way, that actually we will see those benefits we've just talked about. The next one is courage. So thinking about courage and having the ability as leaders to admit that we don't have all the answers and that sometimes we get it wrong. And how do we be our authentic selves to lead in a way that encourages others to follow our lead? It's about taking risks and understanding where the learning comes in taking those risks. And the last one, the last signature trait for an inclusive leader, is thinking about cognizance. So actually thinking about our bias and how it can hinder us if it's not something that we're aware of. There's lots and lots of research that exists where unconscious bias training has been slated and suggested that it's not effective. In our experience as a consultancy, we will be inclined to agree that actually if you undertake unconscious bias in isolation, then actually the chances are that that learning and that behavioural change will not stick and will not be embedded. But it's really critical, it's a really critical component of an inclusive leader to be aware of your bias. Some of you may well have done some bias training in the past. For some, it may be a relatively new topic, but it's important to remember that every single person, without exception, has bias. And actually what's essential is not that we're aiming to get to a stage where we eradicate that bias. It's really critical to our survival. As humans, we need that bias. It's our fight or flight mechanism, and there are circumstances where it's absolutely essential. But what we need to understand is we need to take that from being an unconscious to being a conscious. So we need to be aware of our bias, and we need to understand where it may be influencing our behaviours, our actions, our words, and actually what impact that has on others around us. To the point of being conscious about your bias, for example, I'm really open to sharing a couple of mine that I've taken from my unconscious and brought them into my conscious. So I have a really strong affiliation or a real passion for the Spanish language. So if anybody around me was to speak Spanish, I know that I would consider that more favourably, just because I absolutely love the language. Conversely, it dawned on me as I started my journey with regard to understanding my bias, that previously I had a misconception that any white van driver would be male. Now I know that that's not the case. And actually what I do is I'm able to now challenge myself when each of those bias comes into play and understand how is that influencing my behaviours and my actions and my words. So that was, again, a real whistle-stop tour of my of Deloitte's 6 signature traits of being an inclusive leader. And I'd encourage, if anybody's interested, to go and have a look, because the Deloitte website provides a whole range of information that sits behind this model and can give you further detail about how this looks in practice and how to develop yourself in this area. But it's really key to understand and appreciate that as an inclusive leader, the expectation is that you can demonstrate all of these 6 components consistently. And that in itself, when you've got a group of individuals who can do that and do that with each other, then that will create and promote a more inclusive environment. So that all sounds really good in theory, and that's all the positives. That's what we should be doing. But there is the fact that this work doesn't get progressed. The conversations over the summer have highlighted that organisations are just not far enough along with this agenda as they should be, or as they'd like to be. And as a result of that, at Charlotte Sweeney Associates, we've been conducting some research. That research has been taking place with over 3,000 senior leaders from different sectors across the world. And we've asked them all the same question. If you're so passionate and committed to creating a more diverse and inclusive organisation, why is little, if any, progress being made? And before I share the detail of that research, I'd ask everybody on the call today to reflect on this and see whether there are any aspects of this that resonate with you. Is there anything that could be holding you back as an individual, or actually do you see and feel that in your leadership group? Could it be holding your organisation back? So when we asked this question, there were 5 key themes that came out consistently. And these themes were as follows. The first one, and the most prevalent, was fear. So does this resonate with you? Fear of saying the wrong thing and fear of doing the wrong thing. How often does that hold us back? Which conversations do we not face into? What sessions do we step away from? Because as leaders, the expectation, the perception is that we're supposed to be well informed on all matters. And actually, with regards to diversity and inclusion, we might just be starting our own journey. It's been my day role for the last couple of years, and I can hand on heart say that it's something that I continue to learn and grow about every single day. The world around diversity and inclusion continues to evolve, so it's an ever-changing picture. So people are never going to get to that end point of knowing everything that they need to know. And it's about being able to position that and respect that that's where you're at in terms of current knowledge and understanding, but keeping going and not letting the fear hold you back. The second theme that came out consistently was ignorance. So actually, from leaders not wanting to get involved because that's not my subject matter, that's not my area of expertise, that's not how I've progressed to be a leader. And actually that holds people back. And what impact does that have on the teams around us? The third point that came out consistently was relinquishing responsibility. And I hear and see this all the time. So you will speak to other leaders who will say, I'm really committed to diversity and inclusion, but that's not my job. We've got a team of people whose job it is to undertake our diversity and inclusion agenda. Diversity and inclusion is absolutely everybody's responsibility. There's not a single person in any organisation who cannot make a difference in this regard. And it's when all those differences, those tiny little differences with regards to behavioural change, decision making, actions, when they all roll up, that's what moves an organisation forwards to becoming more inclusive. So take and own that responsibility. And that sits even heavier on our shoulders as leaders. We set the tone, we set the pace, and we influence others. The fourth theme that came out consistently was system inertia. So actually thinking about the systems and the barriers that exist in the organisations that are around us, and actually how we continue to not challenge the status quo or justify the position that we're in currently rather than doing something different. And that's often because doing something different is difficult. I'm sure there's lots of you on this call with regards to the industries and the sectors that you work in that constantly, day in, day out, are trying to effect change in a sustainable, authentic way. And actually, in order to do that, we need to do something different. So if you've already got a foundation in change management and undertaking transformational change in organisations, so much of that skill set is transferable to diversity and inclusion. It puts you in a really, really strong position to do this and do this well. And the fifth theme that came out consistently was time. And I'm sure everybody can identify with this, particularly the time of year. I know I'm speaking to clients and colleagues all the time about how time precious we are and how actually there just isn't the capacity right now. And therefore doing the day job is enough. Well, actually, we need to make time for this. We need to make time for this because, again, it's everybody's responsibility and it underpins so much of the rest of the business's strategic objectives. It is a business critical enabler. So that's what our research indicated was holding leaders back. So I'm hoping that's given you a really nice balanced approach to thinking about what do I need to do, but what obstacles and what barriers might be holding me back, and what do I see in others? What could I talk to colleagues about to face into the conversation to really understand and get under the skin of why our organisation is being held back or not progressing at the pace that either our customers demand, our employees demand, or equally that we as a leadership team want to progress. So before I close, just to share some final thoughts and recommendations with you. The view there is one that we like to use regularly. And what we're trying to articulate with this point is that everybody has a different view. And an inclusive environment will feel like those views are understood, shared, respected and valued. We all see things differently and we all see things from our view of the world based on our experiences, our upbringing, our beliefs. So many components make our view of the world specific, but that doesn't make my view of the world any less valued or relevant than anyone else's. So it's how do we bring all those views together and how do we appreciate and create an environment where those views can be shared and developed to bring the best customer experience, the best products to really make our organisation successful. And from a personal point of view, if I was to share some top tips thinking about what you can do and what you can do straight away, I'd encourage everybody to start small. I'm sure there's a number of you on today's session who have done work around creating habits, be that in a professional capacity or good habits at home, exercising more, spending less time on your phone. The key is always to start small, but it's crucial we make a start. I mentioned it a short while ago when we were talking about the signature traits. So be consistent, especially when it's difficult, even more so when it's difficult, when the going gets tough and we really want to revert to type and go back to the way that we've always done it because it's easier. That's the time that we need to push through and do something different. Because if we don't, there will be no shift in the dial. The third thing I'd ask everybody to really consider is holding that mirror up. So actually as leaders, what's the shadow that we cast? What do we lead by example? Where do we role model? And what do others see in us? I'm sure a lot of you in today's session will agree that actions speak louder than words. So actually, do our actions always match our words? Do we tell people that we're committed to diversity and inclusion, but then our actions would suggest something different? And finally, I'd encourage everybody to just keep going. Your diversity and inclusion agenda and your journey is absolutely unique to you. So whether this is something that you're well versed in and you're already a really strong ally with regards to this agenda, brilliant, keep going. As I said, the world around us evolves. Or if you're right at the beginning, that's absolutely okay too. Everybody is at a different point and all we need to do is just keep going. And with that, as leaders, we're in the position to influence and take others with us too. Thank you for your time, and I'm really looking forward to hearing from the other speakers and then opening it up to Q&A in a short while. If there's anything that you'd like to discuss in further detail, then I'm happy to do that, and I'd love to hear your thoughts and experiences. Thanks, John. I'll hand back to you.
Thank you, Katie. There's some great material in there and some good questions coming in, so please do stick about and we'll deal with them from 5 o'clock till we close at 15:15. Can I now welcome Hannah, Matthew and Becky, who are going to take us on the Covea diversity and inclusion journey so far. I'll hand over the screen to you, Matthew.
Thank you. Okay. Hi, everyone. We're going to talk to you around the diversity inclusion journey for Covea Insurance. We'll focus on Covea Digital, which is our separate technology brand, and then we'll cover off more broadly what we've been doing in the D&I space and how that's helped us as an organisation. Katie touched on this in her presentation, that the actual data that showcases the case for inclusion. So the business benefits, particularly around creating diversity in thinking and how that reduces risk, how it increases innovation, how businesses are more likely to achieve successful outcomes. But I think the question here is, why does there need to be a business case for inclusion? I think if ethically, we all know it's the right thing to do. And I think as organisations, we can look around our various businesses, and you'll get a view by looking at the people that are sat around you as to how inclusive we actually are. So I'm going to pass over to Becky, and she's going to talk to you about what she's been doing specifically in the digital space.
Thank you, Matthew. Yeah, hi everyone. So I'm Becky. I'm the technology recruitment partner at Covea. So I'm responsible for all things digital recruitment, really, and D&I is a really big part of that. So I'm going to talk through what we're doing about diversity and inclusion from a digital recruitment perspective. We're really passionate about representing the communities that we serve, and we have quite a few initiatives in place to help us to work towards this goal. So I'm going to share some of those with you now. So firstly, it's really important to build a future talent pipeline and really look at the longer term, especially in tech, where there is a bit of a shortage of diverse candidates in certain areas. We really do need to think about investing in that future talent in order to address it and make it better for the future. If we don't, we're going to carry on having this conversation over and over again. And I'm sure that's something none of us want to be doing in 10, 15 years' time. So a few of the things that we're doing in order to build out that future talent pipeline are here. So we do a lot of work partnering with schools and education providers, so delivering talks, activities, supporting them with work experience, all sorts really. It's really important that we educate the younger generation on the options available to them, especially in tech. You know, there's a lot of work going on about getting people into coding, software engineering, and that's really important, but it isn't just about coding. There's so many different careers that lend themselves to different types of people, different skill sets. I think it's really important that we educate that next generation about those options available to them. I definitely wish that I'd known more when I was making those choices back at school. We also do a lot of work partnering with charities and social initiatives. They provide a really vital service and reach far more people than we could ever do on our own, to be honest. So we've signed up to the Tech She Can Talent Charter and support STEMettes as well. We've actually just run a takeover day with STEMettes, where 5 different women working in STEM across Covea, all different levels of seniority, different types of jobs, from software engineering to security, PMO, all over really the different areas of digital. And we ran a variety of fun sessions for the girls aged 7 right up to 25, really with the aim of educating them about all the different options available to them in STEM. And feedback from those sessions was really positive. So hopefully we inspired a few girls to consider a career in digital from that. And we continue to support both of those initiatives as well going forwards. We've also just sent a few females on an Aspiring Leaders programme as well with our local college. That's really helping us to build up our leadership capability of females in digital. And we're investing in education as well. So we have a number of STEM apprenticeships now in place. We've also sent our first group of individuals on a development accelerator program, really to upskill their software engineering. And we're creating a coding club for the new year as well, which will be open to everyone. It might be people who are looking to step into digital for their career, maybe just people who want to help their children with the homework. But really, we hope to introduce people from a variety of backgrounds into tech with that. Next slide, please, Matthew. Thank you. So we also need to think about bringing in diverse talent right now. It's just as important as building the future pipeline, and we try to really increase the diversity of our incoming workforce, as well as those that are going to be joining us in the future. So there's a few things that we do to really kind of increase this and increase the diversity of those coming through our doors right now. So we've signed up to a number of job boards that have a specific D&I focus. These are becoming more and more popular, so I'd really recommend spending some time doing your research and looking into the different options available. But we've done some work with Diversifying and had a bit of success through there. And we're also looking at something called Candidate X for when that launches as well. I think that's going to be a big game changer to this market. We're also thinking about our targeted sourcing and our direct sourcing. So as a kind of internal recruiter, a lot of my time is spent doing that sourcing, speaking to candidates and kind of tapping them on the shoulder and seeing if they'd be interested in our roles. So I try to be really conscious of presenting a really diverse range of candidates to the hiring managers. So it can be a challenge, and sometimes you do need to look that bit harder to make sure that that shortlist is fully representative. So it's about looking deeper than the obvious places. So not just relying on a quick LinkedIn search, but look in the places where these more diverse candidates might be. There might be specific groups or events related to the role that have a D&I in particular focus. And then finally, when it comes to our agencies and PSL, we work with a really close PSL of just 4 agencies exclusively, and that means we can really manage our relationship with them and what we expect of them. So when we decide to partner with an agency, we ask them to agree to a number of commitments, and one of those is to really provide diverse and fully inclusive shortlists. We don't currently kind of measure them on that, but we're looking at kind of introducing that and asking them to report on the diversity of candidates that they submit to us. And we're also trialling a new agency with a specific D&I focus as well. That's something similar to the job boards. I think recruitment agencies are picking up on the fact that this is becoming more and more important, and there is some out there that do have that specific focus. So quite excited to see the results of that. And then finally, next slide please, Matthew. Thank you. Yeah, finally, something else that we're really focusing on is actually making some noise about the brilliant people and specifically women in this example that we already have within our business, with the aim of kind of making them feel appreciated and also raising awareness of us as a diverse employer, which will hopefully then in turn attract more females into the business. So to do this, we've created a number of networks with volunteers of different genders, sexual orientations, race, ethnicities, and people with neurodiverse needs. And then we can really rely on those volunteers to work as advocates and help us to deliver on a variety of projects. They're almost like role models for us, and we like to shine a light on them. So we're consciously making an effort to publicly celebrate these women within our business. You can see some screenshots here from stuff that we've done that, but it's things like social content, just sharing profiles of these women and the brilliant things that they do on our various channels, podcasts, blogs, events, getting them involved in writing blogs for our websites and for other people as well, speaking at events and on podcasts, really discussing their roles, the challenges, exciting things that they're working on, their career journey, and things that they may have come across particularly challenging as well within their career. Perhaps that may be because they're a woman, or just other challenges in general. And then awards is the last one. So quite a few of our women have actually been nominated and even won awards. So we try to make a lot of noise about that as well, and just celebrating the great talent that we have, both internally and to the external market as well. So yeah, that was just a quick whistle-stop tour really of what we're doing from a recruitment perspective. And I will pass you on to Hannah.
Thanks, Becky, and thank you, Matthew, as well. I think it was really interesting listening to Katie's presentation at the beginning of this webinar, and hearing some of the kind of traits that you set out there from the research by Deloitte on what the traits of inclusive leadership are, and also on the difference between diversity and inclusion. And what I'm hoping to do for you in this part of our presentation is to, I suppose, be able to use us as a little bit of a case study of how we've implemented and worked towards some of those aspects. So Becky's taken you through the work that we've been doing to try to develop a more diverse talent pipeline into the organisation, and to celebrate and raise the visibility of the diverse portfolio of people that we have working for us in the organisation. But as Katie highlighted earlier, diversity is only half of the issue in hand. And actually, what we discovered when we started out on our journey of diversity and inclusion about 6 years ago now, is that you can only get to a certain point without focusing on inclusion. So we started our journey from looking at gender diversity, made some good progress initially, and then started to realise that actually what we needed to focus on wasn't just about enabling, giving women the right opportunities and providing them with the right support, making sure that they felt confident to apply for the right sort of positions. Actually, we needed to make sure that we started to address some of those cultural and systemic issues that were preventing people from moving forward. And the really important focus for us was focusing on inclusion first, because without inclusion, diversity doesn't stick. And what we didn't want is that revolving door of talent where we're bringing in people who aren't in the original likeness of our hiring managers, which is where we typically tend to go first and foremost when we're looking for bringing new people into the organisation, because it's what we know and it's what sits within our accepted groups, but it doesn't always get us where we need to be. So we focused on how we can build inclusion. Our journey has evolved, focusing on that over time in different ways. So we began looking at things like unconscious bias, and to Katie's point, unconscious bias training isn't going to eliminate unconscious bias, but what it does is raises awareness of those biases in ourselves and helps us to explore those more deeply. And we developed our own internal e-learning module, Explore Your Thinking, which is very much about that, on the back of some unconscious bias training we'd had, which is, when it comes to making decisions, how are we recognising the impact that bias is having on what our first thought process is, and how do we kind of slow that down and just take the time to explore what's going on so that we can get to the right end result. So that was quite a powerful initial realization for us. We invested in some great support for our leadership population, working with an organisation called PDT Global, who ran a number of workshops on inclusive leadership and inclusive behaviours, and provided our leadership teams with some toolkits to then take forward to their teams. And to an extent, that helped move us forward. It gave people a greater awareness of the kinds of behaviours that we needed to implement. But the challenge that we had, and I'm coming back to, again, to some of Katie's points here, was around things like cultural intelligence, cognizance of those biases, curiosity. And actually what we realised is that in order for people, for us to be able to really make progress from an inclusion point of view, what we needed to do was to get to a point where we can really start to understand more about the lived experiences of our people within the organisation, so that we could implement the kinds of changes that really needed to happen. And we can only do that by listening to how, to the experiences of those individuals and of those communities, and then working out what that means for us. So where we've got this this sort of who feels it knows it, that's for us about the recognition that in order for us to be able to become a truly inclusive organisation, we need to tap into the experiences of the people who are feeling less included, who are part of marginalised groups, so that we can start to address that stigmatisation, the bias, the prejudice that's at play, and tackle that. So we've really built our culture over the last few years around creating an environment of safety, enabling people to feel okay about talking about what's happening for them, being who they are, and being able to bring forward challenge, feedback, innovation, ideas, challenge the status quo. And that's actually something that I think is quite difficult to achieve, because in order for us to be able to do that, in order for individuals to do that, they need to feel like they're going to be accepted and not judged, or feel some kind of retribution for kind of doing that. And the best way that we could we found to do that was to enable to invite our leaders to look in at themselves and to become a bit more vulnerable with their people. So to admit they don't have all the answers all the time, they don't know, they don't always know what the right way is to go, that their perspective might not always be right, that they need to invite other perspectives and actively seek those out, so that we can enable people to share that different point of view. And we also looked at, from an inclusion point of view, how we can really make it stick. And we recognise that for it to be effective, we need everybody to feel accountable for it. So it's not just a case of having a team focusing on diversity and inclusion, but actually make it everybody's responsibility. And again, this is the point that you made, Katie, in your presentation. How do we kind of move past that point of people sort of relinquishing responsibility, and as leaders get to a point where we think, okay, what can I do about this? How do I take responsibility? So I work in a diversity and inclusion role. I've only come into this role rather has only been created since the beginning of this year, because over the initial part of our journey, we wanted to make sure that whilst we didn't have a particular team focusing on D&I, it was the responsibility of a number of different people, and that we've worked with the business in order to build that journey collaboratively and to get to the point we are now. What we've been able to do over time is to establish a number of employee networks that enable us to tap into that lived experience, and we're broadening accountability for D&I by inviting our executive team and our leadership teams to become exec sponsors and leadership team advocates of those networks, providing them with mentoring, support, and advocacy for the kind of work that they're doing. And that's been really powerful, because not only does it support the leaders to be able to better educate themselves on the kinds of the kind of issues that some of those underrepresented groups are facing, it also enables them to then take those experiences back and share them across the wider leadership team, so to engage other leaders as a part of that journey. The way that we've approached our D&I journey from the beginning has always been about keeping it real, organic, believable, authentic. And for us, the important thing was not to start from a point of saying, okay, we need to do this, and in order for us to be effective, we need to make sure that we're ticking all the different kind of strands of diversity. Instead, we wanted to approach our D&I journey from a point of view of what is it that matters to the people here in our organisation? How do we create opportunities for them to speak up, to have a voice, empower them to go and make a difference, and to act on the things that they think are important for us to concentrate on? So whilst we have these employee networks that have emerged more recently, our initial approach to diversity and inclusion was to have a series of D&I partners. So there were groups based in our main office locations of volunteers who had come forward to be a part of the journey, who wanted to take action, to do something about it, but weren't focusing on specific strands. So they started focusing on things like National Carers Week, on celebrating Pride, on events like Eid, things that were that were personal to them or personal to people in their team that they wanted to raise awareness of or campaign around. And over time, we've found that as we've built this culture of safety and trust, those employee networks have begun to emerge into more specific strands. So we've now got employee groups, if you can move on to the next slide for me a moment, Matthew, including Conveyor Pride, so that's our LGBTQ+ network, Inspiring Colour at Conveyor, which is a recent race and ethnicity network. We have a network called Conveyor Minds, focused on destigmatising mental health and supporting mental well-being. We have a wellbeing group focused on your personal lifestyle and physical health and social connection, which has been really critical throughout the last few months as we've experienced that challenge with collaboration and connection as a result of COVID, putting us in sort of into a hybrid working situation with many of us working remotely for one another. And we also have a charity network who are able to connect in with these various D&I networks to make sure that we're providing support to our external communities and thinking about the impact we have externally as well. So I think the message I would give in terms of building the right culture from the starting point is that it's really important as leaders that we listen to the people within our organisation. That if we want to create the right culture, that we provide platforms and opportunities for them to have their voice heard, that we give them some autonomy and empowerment to go ahead and make the changes that they think are the things that need to happen. And that as leaders, we get behind that, we back it, and we're visible within those to drive it forward. I'd also say, if I can you can go on to the next slide, Matthew, that one of the things that's really helped us in our inclusion journey, I'm just waiting for it to update, is external partnerships. So we have built relationships with a number of external partners, and predominantly the one that's perhaps had the most impact for us has been Business in the Community. We're a member of the charity, and we work as a campaign partner on both their wellbeing and race at work partnerships. And that's been really helpful in helping us to develop our strategy, in providing us with resources and toolkits that everybody in our organisation can tap into, and particularly our leaders in working with their teams. And it's a great source of being able to educate yourself about issues and ways to address those. And there are a number of free resources that you can tap into on the Business in the Community website, whether you are a member or not. But I would strongly encourage that. It's been extremely beneficial for us. You can go on to the last slide for me, Matthew. I'm conscious I haven't got masses of time left, and I'm a chatter, so I'll try and keep this nice and succinct. The last thing I just wanted to focus on, given the nature of the webinar today, is what we would, I suppose, classify as some of the traits of inclusive leadership. And these very much align with the messages that you were sharing earlier on today, Katie. And I thought it was really helpful not just to see those 6 signature traits that you shared with us from Deloitte, but also that research that that Charlotte Sweeney Associates have done around the things that prevent us as leaders perhaps being really focusing on inclusion and demonstrating those behaviours. And the 2 that really resonated with me that I think are things that we are continuing to try and tackle is the point around it's not my responsibility. I'm not an expert in this. Where do I begin from? That's been really fascinating. And I think the other point that you made, which really resonated, was about the point around kind of we haven't got the time for this. This really matters, but actually when push comes to shove, we've got goals to achieve. We've got business critical deadlines we need to implement. And the point you made about in order for us to be able to achieve the strategic goals that we want to, we absolutely have to get the culture right. And I think the element that has been probably the most powerful for us from a leadership community point of view has been vulnerability. So if I come back to our employee networks and talk about an example like Conveyor Minds has been about destigmatizing mental health. And in order to do that, in order to encourage other people to open up, we've had some of our top leaders sharing their very personal stories of how they've been affected by mental health issues at different points in their journey. And what that's enabled is other people to start to open up. Now, it might not be that every leader has a story to tell that's mental health related, but a vulnerability around who we are, what goes on in our lives, and that curiosity about what happens for other people creates a space where other people feel like they can openly admit that they're not great at everything. They have strengths in some areas, and to play to those strengths, to admit mistakes so that as a team you can work through those and problem solve, to recognise that we need to be there for and support each other. And the other thing I would say from a leadership point of view that really stood out to me was the point about sort of cultural intelligence and how we can educate ourselves. I think it's quite easy as leaders, it's quite easy as individuals sometimes to sort of wait for the information to come at us, and there's a lot of information that we hear about in the D&I space at the moment. But actually there will be opportunities for us to kind of reach out and be more proactive in building our own awareness of the kinds of issues that our teams might be facing so that we can do more about it. So just to round off where we are, I just wanted to pose a question to you. And the question is something which I try to reflect on myself. It's not easy, but it's just something which I think can be quite helpful. And it's actually five questions really. But so in the last month, when you think about the way in which you've interacted with your team, when was the last time that you were vulnerable with your team? So that might be admitting a mistake. It might be admitting you're not having a great day. It might be admitting you're really struggling with a task and you don't know how to overcome it. When was the last time you actively sought out a missing perspective? So when you're on a call, particularly now in meetings that are often virtual with remote teams, or even if your team is physically with you in the office, how are you drawing out those unspoken voices, those unspoken perspectives, perhaps the ones that sometimes get silenced by the groupthink mentality? In the last month, what have you done to educate yourself on a topic related to diversity and inclusion that you know is an issue for you at the moment? And sometimes having a look around, it's not always hard to spot an opportunity. So for example, we've got a big focus at the moment on race and ethnicity. When we look around our organisation, we know that we have a lack of representation of people of colour, and I'm trying to understand what those kinds of issues might be when you're not a person of colour and you don't have lived experience yourself can be really powerful. Or if you are, to reach out and talk to others who've got similar shared experiences. The next one is, when's the last time in the last month that you stood up for somebody else or challenged something in the face of it not being an easy thing to do? Listening to a recent talk by Renee Edo-Lodge, who wrote the book, Why I'm No Longer Talking to White People About Race, something really stood out to me that she said, which was, if you want to be friends with everybody, don't be anti-racist. And that comes back to the kind of point about the kind of signature trait of an inclusive leader of courage. Sometimes as an inclusive leader, we have to put our heads above the parapet and have conversations that are uncomfortable, that even with our peers, that particularly when it comes down to things that are considered to be banter. And finally, in the last month, when's the last time that you explored your own biases and the impact that they had on the decision that you've made? Sometimes I think these questions can lead to uncomfortable things for us to have to explore for ourselves, but ultimately they're enlightening and encourage us to be more inclusive leaders. Thank you very much for listening. I hope that's been an interesting case study for you, bringing to life some of the points that Katie made. I thank you, Becky and Matthew, as well, and we look forward to your questions later on. Over to you, John.
Thank you very much for that, all three. There's some very challenging ideas in there for leaders, in particular, the showing of vulnerability. Can I now welcome Stacey Foreman from the University of Leeds. She's going to talk to us about the Women in Tech Network. If I can hand over the screen to you, Stacey.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. Just reflecting on what the speakers have had to say this afternoon, which has all been really interesting. We're probably going to be starting from a point of firsts rather than being through a long journey at the moment. And that's what I want to talk to you about today, about firsts. So if you've not met me before, my name is Stacey Foreman. I'm the IT PMO manager and the Equality and Diversity rep for IT at the University of Leeds. And I'd just like to start our journey together today talking about firsts with an illustration you may be familiar with called That Little Girl Was Me. So this shows the new Vice President-elect Kamala Harris walking alongside the shadow of civil rights trailblazer Ruby Bridges. This went viral after the announcement that the Biden-Harris campaign had won the 2020 US presidential election. It was created by an artist working with the Sacramento-based company Good Trouble. So at the age of 56, Kamala Harris is not only the first woman in history to become Vice President-elect, but also the first Black person and the first person of South Asian descent to do so. Ruby Bridges, whose shadow you can see on the illustration, was the first African-American child to face down an angry mob in order to desegregate a school in Louisiana on November the 14th, 1960. She was 6 years old at the time that she did this. So pictorial representations of events are really useful to me as I learn in a really visual way, and the advent of memes has really helped me to absorb information in a different way. And the clever and endlessly creative people of the internet created the following two visuals. One containing real images depicting all of the previous incumbents of the role that Kamala is now going to take on, or the one that I personally prefer, which is that most beloved communication tool of the millennial, the emoji. So I think that you can agree that the previous incumbents of this role all have a few repeated characteristics. And this led me to consider what my own organisation would look like if represented by emojis. So I can just move on. In September of this year, Simona Botendijk became the first woman Vice-Chancellor at the University of Leeds, or as the emojis might put it, lucky number 13. If I represent my own leadership team in this way, we are far from gender parity in this space. And as for the leader of IT, whether an IT director or CIO, we've never had one. So that's still to happen. It's another first to be conquered. So the question is, how can this be? How have we ended up in the situation whereby there's so few women represented in technology at the University of Leeds and in the sector in general? So these are a few statistics from the WISE campaign, so that's Women in Science and Engineering. And this shows that the percentage of women IT professionals in the UK today remains stuck at 16%, despite the major growth of the industry. Only 5% of leadership roles in the UK technology sector are taken up by women. The pipeline isn't much better, with women and girls taking up only 16% of available technology courses. At the University of Leeds, we have about 21% of IT staff at the University of Leeds, and I think that's quite a good sort of level to have, really. But the more technical the team is, the less women there are represented within those groups. Such low representation within teams leads to self-doubt and isolation, imposter syndrome, and 47% of women eventually leave the industry in the UK. So why? Why is this happening? One of the main issues, particularly in IT, is it's really hard to be what you cannot see. If you have no role models, if you're not able to see women flourishing in technical careers, then you begin to feel unwelcome, unseen, and like your own career is not as important as that of the men who surround you and who have gone before you. When I arrived at Leeds, I was lucky enough to be surrounded by forward-thinking and engaged heads of service who gave me the autonomy to start to pursue the Women in Tech network. And although we're in our infancy, we have big plans. So I just wanted to run you through very quickly what we plan to do. To improve opportunities and canvass women at our events in order to understand their journey, their barriers, make changes where we can that will positively affect their work and their work lives, and use this information to change the mindset and enshrine these into the fabric of everything that we do. Providing constructive and healthy challenges to overt and covert bias, sexism and microaggressions can be a really tough thing to do, but it must be done visibly and unapologetically and from every angle. If I see it, I call it out, and I actively encourage the members of the group to do so. But this obviously is a muscle that needs to develop, and we need to take the time to be able to build the strength against this with the women who attend our groups. We'll also be working with our HR department to encourage uptake of implicit bias training and to look at other bite-sized training that we might commission in these areas that would be effective. We also want to find flexible ways to overcome inherent barriers to progression and retention of women staff through the maximisation of flexible working policies and development opportunities. We're also looking to create safe spaces and opportunities for women's voices to be heard. I am so frequently the lone female voice in so many rooms, and just before we started this session, I commented that the panel was mostly female. And it's not very often that I get to speak in this kind of environment with women around me. So this group, this network, is an opportunity for people to be seen and heard and to speak their truth about how it is working in a minority group without fear of retribution, being spoken over or hushed. It's their time to shine and be the focus of the network. More importantly, it's an opportunity to inspire each other and in turn become role models, not just amongst peers within a university setting, and that is really important, but it's also to inspire a different generation through schools and community events when the world has recovered from the pandemic. We hope to be able to provide events to these young people and show that women are technical and that technology is a valid choice for both career and also just for the simple joy of creating something. Technology is an exciting sector, and I hate to think that young women don't get to investigate technical pathways simply because of their gender. The network is open to all university staff to attend and benefit from the events we put on, and we're particularly conscious of welcoming minority staff who don't have similar networks to support them and who may experience barriers caused by intersectionality. Women in Tech is there as a space for all minority voices, in fact, impacted by implicit bias. So I just wanted to run through very quickly some of the events that we've put on. So very recently, we held a facilitation skills course to raise the skills of women in lower grades who might not get the opportunity to present, chair or facilitate group work commissioned by the network. An event on perfection and progression. So this was a myth busting session with a recruitment agency and our own HR officer about the statement famously referred to by Sheryl Sandberg of Facebook in her book Lean In, which identified that a study from Hewlett Packard said that women will only apply for a job if they meet 100% of the desirable criteria. Men average around 60%. So we spent some time breaking down the barriers of both perfection and progression, how it impacts women, and it was really well received. The event's been mostly well received was the one that we initiated for International Men's Day. Yes, International Men's Day, Women's Network, in support of mental health for all, where we had a number of inspirational speakers from a variety of backgrounds, including a university ambassador, a wellbeing ambassador, who provided lots of resources available to staff, a student ambassador who shared the 5 ways to wellbeing and his take on mental health of minorities, and finally a male member of staff shared his very touching story about his own psychiatric break, which was so moving. You could hear a pin drop the whole time, and he shared really emotively his own story, and it was an incredible event, and I'm really proud of it. I'm really proud to have been a part of it. So you might be thinking, this all sounds really good, I think I'm going to do that. So I just wanted to set up a little guide here to get you on your way if you're thinking about starting your own network, whoever it would support. So the most important thing is to ensure that you've got top-down buy-in in the form of senior sponsorship. I'm very lucky that my senior team are incredibly engaged and invested in this and set a good example to everyone by attending each meeting. I ask literally everybody if they have inspiring women in their filofaxes to grow my networks, and I'm sure there are women here today who would put on a great show for the network. So please get in touch if you're interested in talking to us, or if you've delivered something recently and you'd be willing to do so in the future. I can't offer a fee, I'm afraid, but I can offer some hopeful and amazing women to talk to and inspire. It's so important that if you've made it through any kind of glass ceiling, that you send the lift down for others. In return, I'd be more than happy to speak to any groups you may have. Just give me a shout and I'd be more than happy to come and talk to anybody. Reach out, understand and talk to your potential members, because they're absolutely full of brilliant ideas. And also don't be too proud to ask them to bring a friend next time. That's how you grow. Monitor your achievements, so keep track of all the events you're undertaking and survey your delegates afterwards, so you've got a record of what you've achieved, but also so that you remain in touch with what they want and what they need. Be the role model, because as a founding member, people will always look to you to keep up the momentum and be their voice. So remember the position of privilege that you hold and keep challenging the norm and being that role model for people. The goal should be to get the group to become self-sufficient, and if your members don't feel comfortable in doing so, help them. For example, the facilitation skills session I mentioned earlier, I'm now looking at a session on imposter syndrome and overcoming that. Provide support in their development wherever it's feasible to do so, and you'll get so much back from them. This one's really important. Don't get disheartened. Everyone is a critic, and I've received some criticism about how my events are too focused on women, too binary for some people's tastes, how it should be maybe just a diversity in tech network. It's always worth remembering that people have directly benefited from oppression of minority groups for generations, and there's a well-established framework for doing so. As previously mentioned, anyone's welcome to join Women in Tech. If you identify as a woman, a man, if you are non-gender conforming, we welcome everybody as long as there's an interest there in the issues the network has been set up to deal with. So gender parity, retention and progression, and inspiring other generations, all are welcome. So remember why you started and don't let detractors put you off. And the last point is just to make a start. Start today, aka be the first. You know, be a Kamala, be a Ruby, be a Simona. So if you're interested in being a role model for the network, please feel free to get in touch with me, or if you've got an interesting story you want to share with us, you can email me or contact me through LinkedIn. I'd love to hear from you, or if you want to speak to me more about Women in Tech, please feel free to get in touch. I just wanted to leave you with one comment from Kamala herself. Whilst I may be the first woman in this office, I will not be the last. We all, as IT leaders, have a responsibility to ensure that we inspire many firsts of many kinds, not just women, and that equality, inclusion, and dignity and respect form vital parts of our policies, procedures, but most importantly, our behaviours towards others. Thank you so much for listening today. I wish you all the very happiest of winter festivals and all the best to you and your families for what I hope is a happy, hopeful, and healthy 2021. And I'll pass you back to John.
Thank you, Stacey. And if I can welcome the whole panel back, please. We have quite a handful of questions that we can deal with in the remaining 10 minutes of the session. So here's one for you, Stacey. And there's a generalized question about how do you intend to inspire young women and girls to join the technology pipeline? And there's a follow-up essentially to that. Do you see that the bias against females in tech starts in schools? And if it does, how would you propose we address that? Stacey, what do you think? Oh, Stacey, you're on mute.
Just muted myself, sorry about that. Yeah, I think the first question relating to how do we as a unit intend to inspire young women and girls, one of the things that we'd like to be able to do, we're trying to reach into our own networks to see where we might make a big difference, and the university is really ideally placed because obviously it has open days for schools and sixth forms and all that kind of stuff. So our intent is to see what we can do in those spaces, but we also have a brown owl within IT who's very keen that we get involved with the network of girl guiding, and one of our intents was to actually deliver hopefully inspiring, interesting sessions with the women that we've got from different aspects. So developers, of course, but also project management. I'm from a project management background, so I'd like to do something around that. We've got lots of BAs, we've got really inspiring sort of app support staff, and we've got a woman in servers, and we thought we'd try and do sort of almost like a kind of speed dating arrangement whereby you could have an hour of spending maybe 15 minutes each with some of these women while they conduct a task, just so you can see all the different types of careers that are available to you as a technical woman. So that was one of the ideas that we have. The pandemic has basically made it so we're not really able to do that because we think it's more effective in person, but that area still requires some development. And what was the second question, sorry?
How you can inspire people if the bias begins in schools. Okay. How can you change that?
I think my presentation is basically about there being role models and actually challenging a lot of those myths around what girls can do and what girls should do is really smashed by being there as role models. And I think it's early mentoring, early visibility of women in tech, and understanding that actually what other people say doesn't necessarily mean that it's true. So I think being able to provide role models to young women and them seeing people living that life is one of the first things that we need to be able to do.
Thank you. And here's a question that relates to one of Katie's points at the outset. And there's another question linked to it. So what can people essentially in positions of privilege do to help women or minorities or to increase diversity and inclusion? And the questioner asks in particular, do you think that the time element of why change isn't happening is also a symptom of another area of weakness in leadership, namely good time management and the ability to prioritize things like diversity and inclusion? Katie, what do you think? Katie, can you hear me all right?
Yeah, sorry, I didn't quite catch you sent that to me. With regards to time, my view on that is that we can all manage to make time for the things that we enjoy.
Mhm.
So the question is, how do we take enjoyment out of this particular topic, and how can we create that time? And actually, as leaders, how do we set the tone with regards to others around us if we demonstrate that we can't make the time? How often do we have those open and honest conversations with our peer group, those above us and those around us, that say, actually, there's just too much to fit the day, and where do we prioritise, and where can we share that load, and how can we make this happen, because this is a non-negotiable for us, and we have to, between us, figure out how to make it happen. And we might not get it right first time, but we're going to give it a go. So that's with regards to time. Would you just remind me of the first point?
What can people in positions of privilege or leadership do to help people who are not?
With regards to that, I think there's a few aspects to it. Is listen. Listen is the first point, and I listened to a brilliant podcast a short while ago by Brené Brown on regards to diversity and inclusion that was fantastic, and that was talking specifically about something that resonated a lot with me at the moment around action bias, and how we listen and we learn, but then we immediately spring into wanting to do something. And actually, sometimes the benefit is really just allowing that time for reflection, that time for digestion, and then thinking about creating action. So listening, I think for people in a position of privilege as well, it's creating space for others to share their experiences, and actually using our position of privilege, whether that might be male privilege, English speaking privilege, education privilege, heterosexual privilege. There's so many aspects to privilege, understanding, but using that position to have a voice, to support and create that space for others.
Matthew, there's a question for you. A lot of initiatives, says one questioner, have been running for years and run by a lot of talented people to remove bias. This is his view, and especially around opening IT to women. And he senses that progress is being blocked one way or the other. What makes you think that Covea's work around diversity and inclusion is going to have an impact?
I think that for it to have an impact, and Becky's talked about the things that we've been doing, Hannah's talked more broadly around Covea. I think that there's two things that are needed to make this stick. The first is, it's not just about bringing in diverse people into the organisation for the sake of numbers. It's about then actually bringing talent into an organisation. To use that talent, then it's really important that you can utilise development programmes and pathways to accelerate individuals through the organisation. And the really critical point, there was some data law that was released a couple of weeks ago by the City of London Corporation that said those from a lower socio-economic background, regardless of performance, will not progress through an organisation at the same rate as someone from a higher socio-economic background. And that's really concerning for me, concerning for the other speakers here, that despite the fact that we're bringing talent into an organisation, they may not progress, and that is down to what the other speakers have talked around bias and around that inability to see talent and progress them. And I think that those are the things that we've been really focusing on as an organisation. How do we utilise the talent that we've brought in, and how do we get them to push through into our leadership networks, because that's where obviously could make some real change.
I offer a slight build to that, John, just with regards to the point you make there, Matthew. It's a really great point, and I think to take that one step further is regards to, you know, the kind of roles that as IT leaders, we think about, we'll talk about systems, and actually bringing this diverse talent in, we need to put this talent in a system that sets them up for success. And naturally, in every organisation with regards to diversity inclusion, you are going to have some critics, you're going to have some saboteurs, be that conscious, be it unconscious. And the danger of not having a system that sets the talent up for success is that actually we play straight into the hands of, well, we brought the talent in, but they've left the organisation. It just doesn't work for us. So actually, it's just as important to attract that talent, but create the right environment, that inclusive environment to allow them to flourish and succeed.
Yeah.
Well, there's much material we haven't covered. It's a huge topic. There are quite a few questions that we haven't reached, but we have run out of time. So thank you to all our speakers for what has been a fascinating and deeply thought-provoking session. There's a great deal for us all to take away from these presentations. We will share the recording of this session, and if anybody thinks of further questions, and indeed as regards the ones we haven't reached, we will do our best to address them for you, which essentially means that I shall forward them to the speakers and ask them to spend a little bit more time answering them. We'll make sure that the answers are shared. In the meantime, do please complete the survey when you close this GoToWebinar session, and give us your thoughts when the feedback email lands in your inbox in an hour's time. We are very keen to hear what you have to say to keep these sessions improving time after time. So I hope you've enjoyed this session. Thank you for attending. Thank you again to our speakers, Katie, Hannah, Matthew, Becky, and Stacey, and goodbye.
Thank you. Bye.